Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Sunday chat's not going to be very long. My hand won't work. That one does. That one half works. I've ordered a brace for that because when I woke up this morning I'd obviously bent that or something or other in the night, because I woke up with a start and that was throbbing, and it needs to keep still basically to give the moving parts chance to heal properly and the swelling to go down and all that cobblers, so it all looks like I'm walking around saying hi to everybody. Yeah, you all right, Orchid? When in actual fact that's the only comfortable position there is, and I need that strapped. I need that rigid down through there so that I can't knock it about in my sleep. He actually said he broke a finger in his sleep once and woke up with a broken finger. That's an ouch, isn't it? That's a definite ouch. Anyway, today I'm going to have a quick look at some plants. This was an idea suggested by somebody that I'm not going to do in full, but I'll do in part, because it means getting plants down and twisting things around and everything, and I'm going to forget and bend my thumb. And I've done it several times today, and I usually end up talking about it because it hurts. Actually, it's not. Can't really say it hurts, it's just flipping uncomfortable. Right, it is now heading towards the middle of October. As far as resting type dendrobiums are concerned, they ought to be coming to the end of their season's growth, providing that that season's growth was in season and actually started at an appropriate time at the beginning of the year. Now, if your growth started halfway through the season, they're still in full flood. Now, if you cut off their reserves and their supplies, they will stop growing where they are. Or they might continue growing and they'll use up the reserves in the other canes. Those are supposed to be for the blooms. So go careful what you do when you've got a plant that's not behaving the way you'd like it to. It might pay to just let it behave the way it wants to for this time round. But it is coming to the time of year where what I will be doing initially is cutting down the frequency of feeds. That goes across the board even if things are still growing, simply because with the days shortening, night temperatures dropping down, day temperatures not doing that well. I mean, we had some sunshine yesterday, still only got up to 22 in here. That's not warm. Yeah, so everything's going to slow down naturally. Yeah, so it won't need as much food. At this time of year I cut the amount of feed down in as much as the strength, but more important the frequency. So instead of, like, say, feed 3 flush 1, I'll probably feed 1 flush 1. Yeah, so, and the frequency, the gap between the waterings with the feed gets bigger because it's not going to use it as quick. There's less daylight and warmth to use it in, because it certainly ain't going to be up to much in the dark, is it? So as things start to slow down, we slow down as well. So we start doing our bit. And I'm just going to grab a few plants to say what ought to happen. I'm not saying it will happen, because at the end of the day I'm going to go round, like, say, all my pots. Let's just say the pots, for instance. And it'll either have feed in that water or it won't. They're all going to get whatever's in that water. I'm not doing half of them with one bit, a quarter with another, and the other quarter with something else. That ain't happening. It never has. I don't see why I should start now. But I've still got my sets, and we'll have a look at some plants and a chat about which set they come into. Now this is Mr. No Tag. It's Epidendrum Laniponese, I think, or something like that. Anyway, but it's an epidendrum, and this is the latest growth on it. And if you look at the top of it, both the top leaves are roughly the same size, and there's no sign of a new one coming in the gap. So that cane's finished growing in the number of leaves it's going to get, but it may still put on some height and some girth. So, okay, no more leaves, but it can still grow in size. And then over here we've got another one that's growing. That looks like it's finishing off at the moment. difficult to tell. I haven't had the plant long, but what it is starting to do is put out a set of new roots. Yeah, well, you know, for those roots to grow and start attaching, they'll still need a bit of feed. But that's almost finished probably what it's going to do this year. But some of these growths didn't start till quite late. Certainly this little one here didn't start till quite late. And this little one here is still growing. So this one is. This one probably isn't. And looking at the oldest cane on here, which was there when I got it, if that's the rough size of what it's going to do, then this one's nearly there anyway. So this one is starting to slow down for the winter, but it's not stopped. It's still got activity on it. It's still growing in some shape or form. Oh, no, I'm not picking on all Dendrobiums. But I'll pick on this one. Now this is a littoria type, and it's pushed up a lot of new growth since I got it. Ow. And more importantly, it still is. Got a nice new growth coming up here, hasn't even opened its leaves yet. So it's inactive growth. These new growths up here haven't opened their leaves properly yet, so they're pushing on. They'll still need some backup. There are some round this side that have fully opened their top leaves. So this one, it's also growing roots. This one is inactive growth. Or is it? This is where we come up against what books say. Yeah. In its natural environment, this grows to one extent or another throughout the year. It does have a drier season, which you could call winter, I suppose, but it's not a dry season at all, and it don't get cold. Yeah. So in its normal environment, this will probably keep going to one extent or another. Do we think it's going to do that here? And the simple answer is no. It's starting to already get a bit too cold, so whatever this is doing, it's going to start slowing right down, and it will get to the point where it's doing absolutely nothing, and that might even involve this new growth stalling because the temperatures are dropping. Now, depending on what it's doing will depend how long I carry on watering that on a regular basis, because to get this through the winter, it was deliberately potted in an airy mix with lots of air holes in the pot, and inside this pot is a rock that comes up to halfway up the pot. Yeah, you know, so it's a pebble really, so it's got rounded sides. That means that the depth of the media is only about that deep in the centre. Most of it gets a bit deeper down the sides. Yeah, so how fast does that dry? Very fast. So in the cool of the winter, when this is not growing, I can still give it a little bit of water without the roots going soggy, which is what took most of my littorias down. It wasn't the fact that they were getting water, that they just were getting water they didn't need. It's not so much they didn't need it, they couldn't use it because of the temperatures. So it's an environmental factor that they shouldn't be encountering, which is low temperatures. Degree of short days as well. Yeah, so this isn't going to behave as it would normally. So if you believe what it says in the books, you could carry on watering and feeding this at a time when it's not doing anything at all. Chances are you take your roots down, which is what I did. We won't do it again. So that's one. Ow. And while that one's out the way, oh, I'll have another mouthful of coffee. It's really difficult remembering not to use your thumb. So he says getting a big one out. Yes, I will. I'm getting this one out simply because anybody that's got dendrobiums, the chances are they've got some nobiles, and everybody worries to death about the nobile hybrids, about the winter rest and blah, blah, blah. Just slow them down a bit and try and cool them down a bit. You don't have to go mad with the hybrids, they're going to bloom anyway. I mean, if you take this one, this was bought in bloom with the two fattest bulbs here, that one and that one, in full flood. They were in bloom. Yeah. There was a new growth on it that was broken, and another couple of new growths, which are these two. So these two were underway when I got it. I love that leaf. Actually, I don't, but at least we found out what the hell it is now. So those two were on their way. Now they've grown on to a reasonable size. They're roughly the same height as the previous canes. They're nowhere near as fat. But then racing up behind are these two. Well, these two are mine from start to finish. They're nearly 6 inches taller than anything this plant has produced before. Terminal leaf. Terminal leaf. Those canes have finished growing. No, they haven't. They're going to get fatter and possibly even a bit taller. They just aren't going to grow another leaf. So go steady. Just because a terminal leaf appears doesn't mean to say all growth has ceased immediately like a light switch. It don't happen like that. And in addition to that, those two canes have now decided to push some roots out in the autumn of the season. Yeah. So, this particular plant, I am starting to slow down, but then I'm starting to slow down all my pots. So I'm not treating this one any different to an Oncidium in a pot at this point. Nothing different. Yeah. The environment's treating it differently because the days are getting shorter and it's getting cooler. Well, it's actually getting quite cool at nights. And daytimes are not coming up to the old 28, 29 degrees that they've had back in the summer. So it's naturally slowing down. Luckily, all the canes on here have finished doing the growing thing and have reached their terminal leaf bang on time, right when they should do. So that's that one. I'm not getting that one out, it's too deep in. Too many plants to move. But at least I don't you fall over because I can't grab anything quick. Don't you dare. Oh, I think I might stick to mounts. At least they're on a hook. Right, so that's a couple of Dendrobiums. What? Cattleyas can be growing at any time of year. I can get this one, I suppose. Let me just have some more coffee. Oh, let's just pick this one first because it's handy and I don't have to use my thumb. This is a relatively recent acquisition. This is a black hair type. It's Cariniferum, and this is its cane that I've grown. Yeah. From a little youngster. It's still growing. Yeah, this leaf here isn't up to full size yet, and inside it is another leaf. It's still in full growth. Or is it? Well, it's trying to be. Again, where this comes from, it wouldn't get cold. It's going to get cold here. So whatever growth it's doing is going to slow down and possibly stop altogether even before the last leaf has formed properly. But as long as it's moving, I'll give it something down here. Now I've had trouble with the black hair types again through the winter on the grounds that they stop growing because of the lack of temperature, because of the low temperature, and their roots have stayed wet because they're not using up the moisture in the pot. Put it on a mount, the problem goes away, because even in the depths of winter that moss will be dry in 2 days, and then it can have a day or two bone dry. It's not growing, it'll be fine. That will get it through the winter. That's it. That's important. That was a major change for some of my Dendrobium types, and the main types were the littorias and the black hair type. The Phalaenopsis types come into that category as well, but they're not quite so finicky. Right, now let's have an Oncidium type. It's a twinkle type. Well, it's actually it's not a true twinkle, it's a twinkle crossback risottoanum. So it's actually got a proper name, but we don't need to worry about that. Now this has just started its spikes. Yeah? It's not a giant of a plant, but it has pushed up some nice new growths, which are producing their spikes. Yeah. This growth here has got a spike either side. That is typical of this type. That's its pseudoanimness in it. So we're producing spikes. But down here we're producing a new growth. That won't spike for a while. It's only just started. It's only that long. So this is growing spikes, maturing bulbs to push those spikes out, and pushing up new growths. And I suspect in underneath that lot there's probably some root activity as well. Is that going to slow down for the winter? Only a little bit, because any growths on that type of plant will carry on growing in the winter because it's not cold enough to stop them. Yeah? So now I've got a mount that needs treating differently. It'll need watering a little more often. So when I go round and do my mounts, which has already gone down to every 2 or 3 days, I'm not going round every day now. They're not using it up. Even the bare root ones have to put up with it. But once we get towards the end of October and possibly into November, when I go round and water the mounts, there'll be 2 types. Those that get some and those that don't. And those that don't will have to wait till next time. And those are the ones that have stopped growing. And those that are still growing get some every time. So I have to change my habits, basically, my work habits. And it is geared up a little bit to what the plants are doing. Take this one. And now for something completely different. Oh. Now this is my only, no, it's not my only bulbophyllum, but I keep thinking it is because I keep forgetting I've got an Elizabethan buckleberry because it's so big it doesn't look anything like that. They're still both bulbophyllums. Right, now this one was in bloom not too long ago. What's it up to now? Ooh, little tiny new growth. Little tiny new growth. Slightly bigger new growth. New growth. It's just coming into growth. Is that going to slow up in the winter? No. So that's a mount that will get watered every time. Now strictly speaking it should get watered a bit more often than that because the moss keeps drying out. It also has a lot of aerial roots. But it's pushing out its new growth and it seems to be doing okay with the treatment it's getting, so I'm not going to change it. I'm just going to let it get on with the way I'm doing it. Let's just grab another one there. That's it's an Laylaceps, this one, that has been suffering for nearly 3 years. This year, on a mount, it decided to go. They just, they either fail usually or they go. And this one decided to go. So we've got a lovely strong new growth here. Another one came up in the middle of the plant in there. And we had another one on the end that's starting to mature. It's not full size, but given that this hasn't grown anything for ages and has been borderline getting thrown out, it's now coming on. So what's that going to do in the winter? It's going to carry on growing. That's going to take no notice of the winter whatsoever. The only thing that might give it a little bit of slowness about its growth rate would be the shorter days. Yeah. If I chose to compensate the shorter days with grow lights, then that would just keep going as though it was summertime. But then the temperature might get it. Because although I supply a heater in the winter to stop the nights dropping down any lower than I want them to, I don't heat it up during the day to 28 degrees. Not doing that. Not made of money, you know. So, you know, that one will carry on growing. That's fine. Something completely different. Let's grab. This is my Laylaceps. Are you gonna? In between watering, every time at least one root grabs hold of the drip tray and sticks to it. So the roots are obviously very good at grabbing hold of stuff. Now we've got 2 nice spikes on this pushing on. Buds will be forming in the not too distant future, but they're not up to full height yet compared with what they've done in the past. Okay, so what have we got here then? We've got 2 new growths. They haven't pushed out a full set of roots yet. The bulb behind has pushed out the roots. So at the moment the only real activity that's visible are the 2 spikes pushing on. Now some say that you can let the spikes form grow and totally bloom from the reserves in the whole of the plant, not just in the bulb that the spike's coming out of. It works like a unit. All these back bulbs and leaves are a unit, and they're supplying energy for these two spikes. Yeah? Why drain the plant? I feed and water when spikes are growing, even if there's no bulbs growing, because I sort of maintain that this is growth, no matter what sort. It's going to need some food. So this carries on getting fed, and I'm hoping that eye is going to push. Can't really force it, but it looks like it might. And at the base of this one with the spike on, that is swelling. So this might come back into growth before it's even bloomed. And the same round here at the base of this one with the spike on. New growth's in there, and it's getting, ow, don't bend your thumb, boy. Point. It's swelling here. Yeah, so it's getting wider, which means this growth is starting. Now it's not going to start very quickly, but is this going to be affected by the winter temperatures? No. It's going to become a little more comfortable, because allegedly Laylaceps is a slightly cooler growing than most other Cattleyas types. It comes from higher up, that's all. So that's not going to take any notice of the winter whatsoever, apart from the fact at some point in the distant future, relatively slow growing spikes because of the height, it will bloom. And it will do that and cheer us up in the middle of winter, as it always does. It didn't bloom one year, and most of you have been following the channel will know exactly why it didn't bloom that year. I read and discussed with another YouTube grower that Laylaceps is a cool grower. I thought to myself, mine's up on a top shelf. That's about as warm as it gets in my place. I know, I'll move it down on the floor where it gets the cooler air coming in when the inlet fan comes on. That'll keep it a lot cooler. It'll be wonderful. Did it bloom? Did it hell? I changed one thing, I thought, temperature. But by putting it down there, it lost its light. So it didn't bloom. So I had a year with two growths with no blooms, no flowers. It did well the following year though, because it held that back. But yeah, it didn't bloom. It decided not to. So Cattleyas are either in growth or no, they're not. If your temperatures drop down a bit too low for Cattleyas types, they will slow. Chances are they won't stop altogether though. Most Cattleyas are classed as intermediate. You know, you're looking at 12, 13, 14, depending on where you look it up, depending on where you read. Some say the minimum nights are 12 for intermediate, some say 13, some say 14. I would say somewhere around that will do. So if that's what your minimum is, they should be able to put up with it. So you shouldn't need to worry too much about them. Now my Vandas are going to slow down soon. One of them's in full flower. As soon as those blooms are finished, it will probably push out one more leaf. The other one's in the middle of doing a new leaf. That will carry on maturing. It won't produce a stunted leaf as a consequence of the winter. It'll just take a hell of a lot longer to produce it and mature it. That's what'll happen. It'll slow. And often you find the root tips, the lovely growing root tips, will just close over in the winter and stop. Again, low temperatures. They'll burst out again in the spring. You don't lose anything, you know, you just lose a period. And then we've got one like this. Ooh, hang on, we need to untwine ourselves. I knew that would happen. Oh dear, I'm getting tangled up in my wires here. This is Dendrobium Hercoglossin, and this does not stop growing. It doesn't stop growing for 2.5 years. So if this is going to carry on extending these canes, which is a necessity because they're not up to full height yet. There's no terminal leaves on these. Well, there is on one or two, but not many. They're still growing. Therefore, they will get a little bit longer, a little bit heavier, and they're just getting to that point now where they're going to keel over, and then they'll drop down to here. And then the new ones will come out over the top again, and that's how it progresses. And if you look at it from the side view, you've got this year's up here, yeah, still upright, starting to lean over a bit, and I'm helping it by tipping the mount. Yeah, so So instead of keeping the mount upright, I'm actually putting it at an angle on its hook just to get these to fall down or lower themselves gently. And then the next lot that have already done it, and then round the back here are the really old canes that are spent. They're not going to bloom again, they've finished. They need coming off. But I'm probably going to leave them there until the spring. There's still an element of reserves in these old canes. They're not totally shriveled. And as a consequence, they can still help support the whole thing. So they'll probably stay there till the spring, at which point I want them off, because these will have dropped down a bit lower, and these will have dropped down, and these will be in the way. They also make the plant look untidy, and as these canes droop over, they will start tangling up with these, and they'll mess up the blooms, because the blooms will be all jumbled up with manky old canes with no leaves on. And we don't want that. So that carries on growing through the winter, therefore it gets some feed and some water. As I said, I'm hanging it over at the moment to make it lean, just to make sure those flipping things come over. Right, now something entirely different. I'm going to have to use my thumb. There might be some words. See, I can use my thumb if I use it rigid, like that. It's upright. It's just sometimes I forget and bend it. Hang on, tangled up again. I knew that would happen. I'm going to get a flipping ballet skirt on if this is going to carry on. Right, that's my Jenkins Eye. This is just about finishing its growth now. Oh, we've got a fern. There's one growth up here that's new. You can tell by the colour. That's a new leaf, so that hasn't matured yet. When it matures, it'll lose that bronze look and just go a nice deep green. And they lose their shine to an extent as they mature as well. I'm just trying to see if I can see any other. I think that may be the last one. The last of the new growths. Oh no, and we've got some down here too. Yeah, there's a novelty for you. Dendrobium Jenkins Eye. For those that have got one or have seen them, and you know they're familiar with them, ever seen a cane with two leaves on? That don't happen often, but that new growth there has got two leaves on it, on a single cane. Now if you look at all the rest of the canes on the whole of that plant, you won't see another one. They're all just single-leaved canes. So yeah, but I think there's just that little one there with its double leaf. And that one's sticking up the top there. So that one's almost finished growing. That's a true rester. That needs a rest. It needs its light increased. So that needs to get nearer the glass somewhere where when we get some sun in the winter with the thinned out shading, it's in full sun through one layer of shading. It's incredibly bright for the UK. But I need to get it in that position to get a good blooming out of it. So it'll cool down naturally. Everything does. That extra light just gives it that extra kick for the blooms. Yeah. So this one is already slowing down, in as much as literally that yesterday I watered my mounts and I missed that one out. That's his first miss. It'll get done again next time, and it'll even get some feed next time, because next time is a feeding session. So it varies. You just have to, let's grab something again entirely different. This is a relatively recently repotted, which way is me why I go that way, reasonably recently repotted Brassia. As a consequence of being repotted, its existing pseudobulbs have shriveled quite badly. Don't care. In this case it doesn't matter, because what it's doing is producing 3 strong new growths, all of which are chucking roots out. So we're starting to replace our root system completely. They're just starting to reach the edge of the pot. Yeah, so we're going to have a large root system. The 3 new growths will not shrivel, they will mature properly, and in addition to that, what does that look like to you? That's a new growth. That's a bent thumb. Come on, concentrate. So that's a new growth that may or may not kick off. It might stall, but it's got 2, 3 new growths. This is the most advanced, just separating its leaves now, but no sign of a pseudobulb yet. And then coming round here, we've got another one in a similar position, a little bit behind. Yeah, but 3 new growths on there with a potential for a 4th. That's growing now, and it's pushing out new roots. Stop feeding a plant like that at your peril. You'll stall it. It's already been stalled by being repotted, ripped out of a giant pot and separated from a giant plant. So, you know, I've got to keep that one going. No messing about with that one. That one's got to grow. Oh. Right, what else carries on growing? Things like the little Tolumnias. They slow down in the winter. They don't grow at such a rate. They don't stop. They just carry on a bit slower. And certainly in my case, they're either mounted or like the new ones in those tiny little pots. They get watered at every opportunity. So even if it's a 3-day gap, they will get done every time. And if there's feed in there, they'll have some. They're not high feeders, Tolumnias. They spend most of their life existing on morning dew, running down little tiny twigs, and that's what they get. So they're not high feeders, not by any means. Now I'll go over this now, and then I think I might, what's that clock say? I think I can find it. Yeah, that'll do. Finish me coffee. I'll go over this because it worried somebody, and we don't want worried people. Well, we don't want people that get worried on my channel and leave worried. We don't want that. You can arrive worried and leave with that sort of, oh, I see, I don't mind that, but we don't want worried people leaving. When I picked these up and I was showing them as new plants, at some point I mentioned something along the lines, and they can stay like that, they'll be fine. And somebody was incredibly worried that I thought it was okay for these to be bare rooted with all these shriveled little roots, and that was actually okay. So we need to explain. These are twig epiphytes. This is how they live. They grow in shrubby, low shrubby areas, and the shrubs that they grow on have often got hardly any leaves because of where they come from. Caribbean basin, basically. It's pretty warm, and there's nearly always a breeze, and in that area it's nearly always a sea breeze. So they're used to moist air around them, but it moves. Yeah. And they get their main source of moisture when it doesn't rain from the morning dew, which happens, you know, if you've got moist air, temperature drops down overnight. At some point during the night or early morning, you'll get morning dew, which means the twigs are wet, and that's where their roots are. And that's where they get their water from, and that'll do them. They've evolved to take in moisture on those tiny little thread-like roots almost instantly and get it up in the plant, where they've got really thick fleshy leaves. You need to feel one of these. You can't show it on film. You've got to see and hold a Tolumnia and feel these leaves. They're almost triangular in shape, and they're thick fleshy leaves. They store nutrients and water to a degree. There's a limit. Chuck them down on the desert sand, they probably won't last too long. But these are happy like this. I've always used the expression for Tolumnia. It's better to think of them as growing on things rather than in things. Now those are growing in little baskets, but they're not, the roots aren't in anything that in any way is going to keep them moist for any length of time. They don't like being in anything that holds moisture for any length of time. They'll rot. They're incredibly fine and appear delicate, those little roots. They're not delicate at all. They're like little wires. They're quite thin and firm. So they're okay as they are. I suspect, knowing me, they will eventually get mounted, but I'm not in a rush to do it. They'll be fine. And they could grow like that. The difference is that when I mount them, can I reach one? Yeah, just about. Ow, thumb again. Use your flipping fingers. See, when I mount them, this one's got a couple of dead leaves on it for some reason. We'll work on that. with the bloody scale again, excuse my French. When I mount it, some roots will be bare rooted, floating off to the edge of the mount, but it gets put on a little pad of moss. Well, let's put it the other way round. The plant gets put on the mount, a little pad of moss gets put around the base of it. So it's got something that holds moisture, but it doesn't cover the whole root system. And the roots will extend outwards. Now, you have to stop and think about it. If the roots were most comfortable in that damp moss, then they'd probably die back if they managed to escape and started heading out across the mount with no moss. But they don't. They grow as well, if not better, once they escape from the moss. So they obviously like it. So that's how I prefer them, where they've got an amount of moss. So when I water that moss is soaking wet, and it will stay wet for the rest of that day unless it's boiling hot in here. And that allows the plant to take in moisture the whole day long, even when it's hot. But it won't be wet the next day, it'll be dry again. Time to do it again if it's warm, the weather. So that's how they like to be. Something like this, an Orangus, that should really be watered every single day. It's not getting it at the moment, and it's still expanding its latest leaf. It's not showing any signs of shriveling. So although it is said they should be watered every single day, the last time this was left 4 days without water, because I happened to be out on the day I should have watered, that little root there grew nearly a centimetre and has now reached the mount. So it will now attach, and that was without any water. Didn't get any help at all. That's got next to no moss on it. A lot of these roots look dead. They're not. They're not growing, but they still help hydrate the plant. And then the more active roots are up around the top here. They're the white ones with the nice golden tips on. So that will slow down a bit in the winter, but it won't stop growing. Far from it. I'll carry on. Right, that'll do, I think. So you've got to think about what's going to happen with your plant as it goes into winter. Are there elements of growth? If there are elements of growth, don't be responsible for stalling the plant. Yeah, your environment may do that for you, that's not you, but don't add in things to make a plant stall. If a plant wants to grow, I would say let it grow. The resting type Dendrobiums, they need that break. Some Cattleyas need that break as well, but it's difficult finding out which ones. But the resting type Dendrobiums, they need that distinct break. But if you've got a relatively new plant, it may not be in season yet. So it might have started new growths later in the season than it should have done, in which case it may grow on through the winter. And I would suggest, it's what I would do, that if it wants to grow, let it grow for its first winter. Let it grow on and mature as much growth as you possibly can, and then you'll probably find it'll slow down a little bit in the spring, early spring, not late spring, and then the season will trigger it to get going again, and hopefully next year's growths will start that bit earlier, which means they should mature by the time you get to go into the resting season. Then you should get a good blooming, providing you treat it right and all that. Things like Restrepias, they don't even hiccup through the winter, because they're in their comfort zone. They actually like it in here in the winter, so they tend to put on more growth then than they do in the summer. They stop in the summer because it's too hot. So yeah, different plants, different habits. You need to get to know your plants. That's the way I always look at it. Get to know your plants. Now obviously new plants you haven't had chance to get to know. Well, that's where you do a bit of reading or ask some questions or whatever. But once you've had a plant a few years, you should know the way it grows, when it grows, how big things should be. That way you can tell if it's doing okay, because if the last 2 years it did this and this year it didn't do as well, you've got to ask why. What went differently this year to the previous couple of years? And it could just be as simple as it's been in the pot too long and the media's starting to go and it's slowing it down from the roots upwards. So go steady, don't let that happen. And that'll do for today. The 3 prize winners from the 10,000k draw, one of them's already been in touch, and I've been in touch with the appropriate nursery, bought the voucher, and it's been sent. And all that happened this morning. So it can be done quickly. So come on, the other 2. Let's get at it. Then I can close it down. As a matter of interest, a point of order, that was the winner of the rest of the world category. So for obvious reasons, the people who were 2nd and 3rd in that category, the first one's got their prize. So you can stand down. But the other 2 prizes haven't actually been dealt with yet. I haven't even got the emails. So, but at least that one went smoothly. I had all the information I need, got in on the site, and I was given a link that took me straight to the gift card section. Made my purchase. I had to go and find some currency converters to find out how much £60 is in New Zealand dollars, because I don't have a flipping clue, do I? So we did a conversion like that so that I could buy the voucher in New Zealand dollars, obviously. And I'll say that's 1 done, 2 to go, hopefully soon. And I will see you next time. I'm hoping tomorrow to be able to do everything in bloom, because it got missed. It won't be everything in bloom on the 8th. It'll be let's have a look at the blooms sort of thing. It's not my regular thing because I've missed the slot now, but hopefully I'll be able to do that tomorrow. That's the theory anyway. So thanks for dropping by, and as I said, don't get into a fluster over this. If you've got winter resting types, if you've got nobile hybrids, give them a bit of a rest if you can. Think of it like that. It's not a panic, it's not a flap. You'll probably get blooms whatever you do. Yeah, you may get more if you put a little bit into helping it along with a bit of a rest. If you can get it a bit cooler, bit brighter, you know, if it's finished growing, stop the feed, cut the watering down a bit, but don't go mad, you'll shrivel your canes, and that don't do them any good. Yeah, so with the hybrids you don't need to go quite so mad. There are other dendrobium types, if you don't do the rest you won't get the blooms, or you'll just get a couple and it'll be a feeble attempt at blooming. So know your plants. Yeah, but as for other types of plants that don't necessarily have a formal rest, just ask yourselves, are they going to get a rest unintentionally because my temperatures are going to drop and my day lengths are going to shorten? So they will slow right down. It's not a proper rest. They haven't stopped. They've just slowed right down because they've got no choice. And if they do that, you've got to go along with them, cut down on the feeding and the watering, or you'll rot the roots, because they're not going to use what's in the pot. Now on a mount, you'd have a job to overwater something, quite honestly. You know, I mean, I've left a mount in a bucket all night by accident. So don't panic about the going into the winter thing. Changes will occur in your natural environment. Even in your home things are going to change, because you're going to whack the heating on. I've had the heating on for the last couple of mornings because it's been flipping freezing when I come down. So, you know, but just all changes should be gradual, as nature normally does. It's not very often in the middle of October you get a snowstorm, well, not here, and it's 10 below zero when the day before it was 25 degrees, you know, but it can happen. Make sure you're ready for a sudden weather change if your plants are anywhere but in your house. So whether they're in a greenhouse, even somewhere like this, and certainly if they're outside, you need to be able to bring them in at a moment's notice, because you never know what that weather's going to do. Right, see you next time. Thanks for dropping by.